Today we're going to talk about the Tigers starting catcher in Jake Rogers, and then as well one of the more like under the radar big storylines heading into the winter and 2024, which is Beau Brieske. All today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Thursday, October 19th, 2023. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Swing for the fences on sleeper picks, and you could win up to 100 times your money. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDON, and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. Alrighty, well, we are back. Hope everyone is having a fantastic week. We're in the home stretch here after Wednesday. And, today we have two pretty fun conversations. They have one formerly the most famous mustache in the Detroit area, but unfortunately, the handlebar is no more. We're going to talk about Jake Rogers. I love catchers. I was a catcher my entire life. Having that, there's so much value in having a good catcher, whether it's defensively, whether it's just like game calling and handling a staff. Like there really isn't a way to quantify and bring down to one number how valuable a catcher can be. And I think that's what makes catchers so fascinating to me. There's so many, knowing the art of pitching, the art of catching, like there's just so much that goes into it. And I am just such a big fan as somebody who spent most of their life doing it. So we will certainly talk about Jake Rogers. Then the second half of the show, we're going to talk about Beau Brieske. And Beau Brieske is really, really fascinating to me. And I know the joke, like I say that about everybody, but I think that we'll get to it when we talk about him, like I said, in the second half. But I really believe that his winter is like not being talked about nearly enough. I think he's an under the radar candidate for some stuff, we'll say for now. And then as well as just like what his role on the team is going to be in 2024, assuming he's around. Like, I don't know. I think Beau Brieske is a really, really fascinating conversation. So we'll get into him later. But first, we're going to start with Jakey Rogers. Jake Rogers ended last season. Let me pull up his stats here with a 221 batting average, a 286 on base percentage, a 444 slug. He had a 7.7% walk rate, a 32.3% K rate. What other stats can we throw at you? A 97 WRC plus, that's slightly below league average, 2.2 F4. Now, this is one, catcher is another position where there is a pretty large discrepancy between Fangraphs and Baseball Reference WAR. As someone who very, very, very deeply adores and admires and researches catchers often, I personally think Fangraphs WAR is significantly better than Baseball Reference WAR with the catcher position specifically. I do think that there's other positions that's the other way. I'm not just like a Fangraphs no matter what kind of person when it comes to that stat, but catcher is one where I kind of am. So he had 2.2 F4, which was the second highest on the team, not on just offensive players, non-pitchers, we'll put it that way. So in all of the non-pitchers on the team, the only person with more F4 on the team was Riley Green, who had 2.3 in just 99 games. Kerry Carpenter also tied with Jake Rogers technically at 2.2. Carpenter did it in 118 games. Rogers did it in just 107, obviously the way that catcher goes. So pretty solid season. I honestly, I think is somewhat of an understatement for Jake Rogers. His OPS on the year 730 as well. So just like ever so slightly below league average. We're going to talk about the catcher value that he does bring. And then After that, we will talk about what he is in the batter's box because I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions on what Jake Rogers is now and what he can be. And I think it's like pretty simple. Like he is what he is. But we're going to start by talking about what he brings value wise to the catcher position. This is a very solid defensive catcher. He is not the best defensive catcher I've ever seen in my life. I think some people get very very carried away with like Jake Rogers is some like elite of the elite. He's very very good. But if you were ranking consistently year in and year out the best defensive catchers in the sport, I don't think too many national media people, probably a little bit of Detroit versus everybody there, but like I don't think too many national people would be pointing to Rogers, but he is certainly well above league average. Like if you were making a top 10 list, I think that he would comfortably be slotted in there. He was in the 90th percentile in blocks above average, which is a very cool stat. One of the cool things about Baseball Savant is that the people over there are constantly trying to find new metrics. And I know that that's, I guess I'll say frustrating for some people, right? Like that there's always new information and that's not always, sometimes that can get overwhelming, A, but B, like you have to figure out what's good and what's not. Like not every single number is going to be meaningful. Um, but I think having any metric for catcher blocking is something we've literally never had before. And so having that and realizing that Rogers had a +8 in that category, which again was in the top 10% among catchers in the game of baseball, is pretty awesome. His caught stealing above average is 47th percentile, so about middle of the pack there. His framing has always been good. He was in the 80th percentile there. He had a +5 in framing value. And then his pop time is 59th percentile, sub 2 seconds, which is solid. But slightly above league average there. So, and then if you care about his sprint speed out of the catcher position, 46th percentile, really not bad when you're comparing it to other catchers around the league. But obviously that's not going to be like where he brings his value. So defensively, this is a good catcher. This is a really solid defensive catcher. I mean, just eye test too. There's some people that have brought up there were a few very timely passed balls this season from Rogers. And from my perspective, there's this interesting debate going on within the catcher community because that does exist. And it's basically the stance debate. And there's kind of this more new school mindset where people want to do the one knee stance. And then there's the more old school mindset, which is the traditional stance that you have a better chance of blocking and whatnot. Because when you're on one knee, it's very hard to block. And it's also very, very difficult, pretty much impossible at the major league level to throw runners out. So the debate is happening there. And the reason that the one leg stance exists is because it is proven over and over and over again. It's not even really debatable at this point that it is a significant bump in framing, right? If you go and you have the one knee, the one leg out kind of approach back there, you are going to have significantly improved framing numbers, which until we get robotic umpires is going to be a part of the game of baseball. And Rogers had a few passed balls that were timely where, he was down on one knee and whatnot. Only a couple. Like I can think of two off the top of my head, and I don't think there were too many more than that. So it's not something that like he was doing all the time. And the thing with Rogers to watch in terms of that receiving style is that it's all situational, and it's something that him and AJ, I'm sure, talk about. AJ was a catcher, right? A major league catcher at that for the Detroit Tigers. So I'm sure that him and AJ have had extensive conversations about in what situations to do it and what situations to not. If they think that somebody that is on first base and they want a better chance at throwing them out, he's going to do in the more traditional stance. Like I know there was one situation where there was a runner on third, right? And they really wanted the strikeout, so he went down to one leg or one knee, whatever you want to call it, and the ball bounced off his kneecap and got away, and the run scored. So like there's certain situations in which like both are applicable, and it's just kind of risk reward. It's not like he's going to do one or the other all season, and I'm fine with that. I'm really fine with just picking your battles, and I'm going to trust both of them to put themselves in the position to do the correct receiving style given the situation. Okay. So that is something that was brought up. But again, like blocks above average on the year, he was in the top 10% amongst catchers in the game of baseball, which I think is kind of an indictment to like when he is in a position to block, he is very, very good at it. So I'm a big fan of Jake Rogers behind the plate. We'll get to his game calling here in a second, and then we'll obviously talk about the offensive side of the ball. But first, I have to tell you all about our friends over at Sleeper. Sleeper is the best. We talked about them at a little bit at the beginning of the show. And you know what? The MLB playoffs here, that means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your payout on cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball's never been more exciting than it is right now. I mean, you see the playoffs every night. It might just be Red October. If you don't know, now you know absolutely. The Phillies are a special type of machine right now, and the Rangers literally have not lost in the postseason yet, at the time of this recording, at least. I guess maybe by the time you're listening to this, that's changed. But it is an exciting time to be a baseball fan. And you can go through the stars of the game and pick more or less on stats for all of them, like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big. I've been using Sleeper for not only daily fantasy, but my fantasy leagues as well for years now. It's a natural transition. The app is one of the best in the business. It's so easy to use and so awesome. I cannot recommend it enough. So use promo code Locked On, and you'll get also get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2 of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate you all for tuning in, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We'll be back tomorrow, recapping a couple more players on this roster. That's, again, unless any news comes out, then obviously we'll talk about that, but not expecting too many news and notes until after the World Series. So we're talking about Jake Rogers. We talked about kind of his value defensively, a little bit, right? League average at throwing runners out. And then when it comes to blocking and framing, et cetera, and all the other things that come with being a defensive catcher, he grades out as a very plus catcher in those categories. And eye test, I believe, backs that up. At least my eye test backs that up pretty comfortably. So when talking about game calling as well, one of the reasons that like people we all, myself very much included, have just like short memories with some of these players. And like one of the early appeals, like, do y'all remember the storyline when Rogers was in the minors? Like one of the early appeals of Jake Rogers was he's going to be this good defensive catcher, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the appeals was that all of our top pitching prospects were in the minors with him, right? Like that was one of the early appeals. It was like, oh, he's gonna. I just said early appeals like 17 times. I apologize, but he's gonna go through the system with all of these top pitching prospects, and then they're all going to be in the majors together, and it's going to be a very natural transition to go to the major leagues because all these prospects that are on the mound are just going to keep throwing to their catcher they've been throwing to since Double A. Like that was a very like cool thing early on that a lot of people pointed to. And certainly we're going to sign free agents, so we're going to bring in pitchers from the outside. And now, if somebody gets called up now, they didn't have Jake Rogers, but for that like 3 or 4 headed monster there that they had kind of brewing of top pitching prospects, that was something that a lot of people really liked. And I think that has translated pretty well. I think Rogers is a good game caller to me. I like what he does. And like, it's also very hard to tell. Like it's not as black and white as like, oh, like his catcher ERA is higher than like other people's. Like pitchers shake off pitches. AJ Hinch calls in pitches sometimes. Like it's not like as black and white as just like, oh, the catcher ERA is like all that matters to Jake Rogers pitch calling. That it's not even close to just that straightforward. So but for the most part, I certainly I disagree with some, but we're never gonna see eye to eye on 100% of the calls on a game-to-game basis over a full season. But I trust his game calling. I think he knows the staff very well. I think he does his homework for all of these pitchers and what works and what doesn't. And I think that he has a really good relationship with all of the staff. You hear him just in post game after games. I know this is kind of like an intangible, not really like a stat thing, but just hearing him say, anytime he's asked about a performance, he always talks about like my guys, and he's talking about the pitching staff. Like I always like that in a catcher. So I'm a big fan of Jake Rogers. And that leads us to a big conversation that a lot of people have with Jake Rogers, which is what is he offensively? And this year, he was a low batting average, high power type of hitter. And a lot of people want to point to, oh, like it's real. I mean, first really like full season, right? Like start to finish, didn't get hurt. Like this is really the first one for him. There's still room to grow. If he can adjust this and this and this, maybe he can improve and raise the batting average. For my money, it's not going to happen. Okay. He is what he is. His mechanics, he just takes hacks. Okay. And like his swing is just such an uppercut swing. Now, from April to September, I will say that he did like pretty objectively change his mechanics a lot in terms of how dramatic of an uppercut it was from the start of the season to the end of the season. But it's not like going anywhere. Like it's always going to be that. And he ended the season on a hot note. I think he did almost hit 300 in the month of September, but he hit 172 in August, right? Like I don't think he's ever going to be a super high batting average person. Now, post All-Star break, he hit 238, right? From after the All-Star break to the end of the season. If he can hang around there and keep the power where it's at, I think everybody will be pretty pleased. And I think you should be pretty pleased with that production. But he is what he is because that is what his swing is. It is a big, aggressive swing for the fences, daddy hack type of swing. His sweet spot percentage this year was in the 95th percentile. His hard hit rate, 73rd percentile. Barrel rate, 78th percentile. Average exit velocity, 70th. Expected slug, 71st. Like this dude hits the ball hard. Now, the flip side of that is he strikes out one of every 3 at bats. He was in the 5th percentile in K rate. You don't go from being striking out 1 out of every 3 plate appearances to like a sub 20% K rate. Like he's sneaky. Like he's 28 years old. It's not happening. So we have to just accept what he is at the plate. He's going to have a low average. If he can keep it above 220 over the course of a season, I will be happy. I know there's some people that hear that and still very much appreciate and want their hitters to have a high batting average. And I completely understand that train of thought. I'm telling you, it's not happening with Jake Rogers, and that is okay. He can still bring a lot of value to this baseball team without having a high batting average. He can have a 20 home run season like he literally did this year in only about 100 games. So that is what he is. Yeah, at the end of the day. He crushed fastballs. 15 of his 20 home runs on the season were on fastballs. He did not do very well against changeups. He did not do very well against big, like loopy curveballs. And I don't see that really changing too dramatically going forward. The one thing that I think he can adjust and I want to see improved, and I think will help a lot of people accept his low batting average going forward, is I think he can walk a lot more. This year, he had a 7.7% walk rate, which is about 10 or 11% lower than league average, right? There is no reason this dude should not have a even like 9% walk rate in my eyes, genuinely. And I know that that's like kind of a dramatic turn that's going from like 10% under league average to like 10% over league average, but he was in the 84th percentile in chase rate. He did not swing outside of the strike zone very often, right? Well above league average in that regard. Now, if you're just pounding the strike zone, he's swinging through it, then so be it. He's going to do that. That's unavoidable. He's going to be a high strikeout guy for his whole career. but I really, really believe that he can walk 1.5 to even 2% more than he did this past season at his peak. And I think that that would help his value exponentially. And he's already, according to Fangraphs, over a 2-win catcher. And I believe that that is something that he can control and that he can improve in because he doesn't expand the strike zone very often, and something that like his mechanics aren't hindering him from doing. He's a catcher, you know the strike zone very well. That's kind of your thing. I really do think that that is like the one thing I circle is like if there's one thing I can improve about Jake Rogers, it's not the batting average, it's not any of that. I think he can walk more, and I think that that would go a really really long way to this lineup. If you can get that OBP to closer to 300 with his power, he'll be over a league average hitter over the course of a season. And that'd be great out of your catcher spot that already is giving you plus defense as well. That would be a starting catcher of the future if he could do that. We'll talk about his 2024. It's pretty straightforward, I think. But we'll talk a little bit about his even further beyond 2024 game plan as well. But first, I got to tell y'all about our friends over at Jace Medical. We've talked about Jace Medical a lot on this show, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the world today, so it is important to be prepared. The Jace case is a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. You can also customize your case and add life-saving medications based on your unique needs. Jace Medical now offers customability for your Jace case with dozens of add-on medications. You can choose the medications that best fit you and your family's unique needs. Jace is currently working on expanding their medical offerings, their medication offerings. In those recent efforts, they have added ivermectin as an option in the Jace case. You can also buy a gift card for your family and your loved ones, so now that they can get a Jace case of their own. Just go to jacemedical.com and enter code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at JASCmedical.com. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. I appreciate y'all for tuning in, making us your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. So talking about Jake Rogers for most of the show, let's transition into a nice, fun Beau Brieske conversation. Beau Brieske hurt for a large majority of this season. If you think back to, well, really for both of these guys, right? Like if you think back to spring, their seasons change so dramatically. And that's why baseball is the best, just because, preseason expectations can change so much because of how long of a season it is. And like I remember in March when it was like the hot take, right? And people were challenging like what I had said when we brought up on this show that Jake Rogers was going to catch more games than Eric Haas this year. That was like kind of spicy. And Beau Brieske, on the flip side, like I had mentioned that I think that he gives and provides great starting pitching depth to this team. Certainly not this year, right? Like he was hurt for the first half of the season. And then when he did come back, he was a pure reliever. So really a lot of moving parts with Brieske. His final stats this season: in 35 innings, he had a 3.6 ERA, 0.2 FWAR, for whatever that's worth to you, 7.97 K per nine, 3.09 walk per nine, and about a home run given up per 9 innings. So there's a lot of moving parts with Beau Brieske. I have a hard time kind of wrapping my head around him, the player. He got moved to the pen. His velocity spiked. I really liked that. Obviously, when he was a starting pitcher in 2022, we had talked a lot about how the changeup was such a plus pitch, but he didn't really have anything that moved side to side, and his fastball was like a low 90s fastball. He moves to the bullpen. Now his fastball is 96, even 97 miles an hour. He still has that changeup, right? That's now 89, even sometimes 90 miles an hour. We're still working on the slider. We'll get to that in a minute, but that was a bump in stuff when he moved to the pen, which obviously you're going to take and you're going to be pretty optimistic about. And then he started off when he first came back, he didn't walk anybody, literally anybody, right? Like the first, I want to say 3 weeks, he had like one or two walks and maybe even the first month of the season. Like he was really pounding the strike zone. And then as the season went along, that slowly kind of crept back up on him. And he ended with a 7.9% walk rate, which is relatively like slightly above, but relatively around, league average type of number. And for how good his changeup is, and how impressive it was to see his fastball spike, he didn't get swings and misses and he didn't get strikeouts, which for a one inning, not a one inning, but for a middle reliever, we'll put it that way, is not something you really want to see unless you're Jason Foley and you're getting a million ground balls. But he was almost exactly league average in ground ball rate. He didn't give up hard contact though. Like, you see what I mean? Like, it's Beau Brieske is a very, very fascinating conversation because there's so much going on. I mean, even looking at his repertoire, I think that's one of the biggest conversations to have with Brieske. This dude went into this season with a four-seamer, a changeup, a sinker, and a slider, right? In 2022, when he started a lot of games, the changeup was a borderline elite pitch. It was phenomenal. All of the metrics, the eye test, when you watched him, it was a very, very effective pitch. The four-seam fastball, not as much, and then he didn't really have anything that moved side to side. This year out of the pen, the four-seam fastball, even though it had an uptick in velocity, wasn't like the best pitch in the world. 271 batting average against. It was probably a middle of the road ish type of fastball. And the changeup numbers skyrocketed. They went way up. Right. Last year, he had a 173 batting average against his changeup. This year, he had a 263 batting average against his changeup. Now, part of that is sample size, right? Again, he only threw 35 innings for the Tigers in 2023. And getting used to a new role and whatnot. There's a lot of factors there outside of just like the pitch itself. But another thing that is when talking about his pitch mix, the thing that pops out to me the most is righty and lefty, his attack sequencing. So, like, for instance, against righties, he has about like 4 pitches he's comfortable throwing against righties. He'll throw the four-seam fastball, obviously. He'll throw the changeup. He throws it less against righties than lefties, but he's not like afraid to throw it. And he threw it over 100 times against righties in 2022. The sinker, which he almost exclusively throws to righties. He doesn't throw them ever to lefties. And then the slider, which is a similar conversation. He throws it almost exclusively to righties and does not throw it very often against lefties. Okay, so it's like 4 pitches you have against right-handed hitters. And Beau Brieske is a righty. Against lefties, he really only throws his four-seamer and his changeup. So the variance between like a 4 pitches for one-handedness and 2 pitches for another is kind of weird to me. And I like, he's only 25. He was the minor league pitcher of the year for the Tigers just like 2 seasons ago. Like, he's got a lot of development and room to grow. He's by no means a finished product. So I'm not trying to say like this is all like this is just it and it's just going to be weird forever. Like, he is going through the development process actively, right? I've compared it to like when you're growing up and you get, like like your skin breaks out and then, you grow up and you get older and that you like that's kind of like the phase that he's in. He's trying a lot of stuff and that is part of the process he's going through. And it's odd to see that much of a variance in those two. And it gets even weirder when you realize that he's a reverse split guy so far as a whole across his entire major league career. He has a 2-pitch pitch against lefties, and yet he is pretty comfortably, not like, 200 OPS points or anything, but pretty solidified, better numbers against lefties than against righties, despite having those 4 pitches. So it's really, really, again, my brain goes a million miles an hour and is really jumping off the walls when talking and trying to pin down what exactly Beau Brieske is. And that leads us to the conversation of the future. I think that there is a very real chance under the radar trade candidate this year. And the reason I say that is not like I love Beau Brieske. He's been on the show. He was an awesome dude. One of my favorite interviews I've done. I'm obviously rooting for him and hope he stays here. But I think that in terms of like fit on the roster, right? Like, are you going to pencil him in as a starting pitcher next year? Is there any chance going forward in the next couple of years you are confident that Beau Brieske is in the starting rotation going forward? I don't think so. And out of the bullpen this year, again, we're going through the development process. There's a lot that he's trying on and messing with and adjusting. And we have a great pitching coach and pitching coaching staff, right, to be able to get the most out of him. But where does he fit into this bullpen long term? Is he ever going to be a prominent like back end reliever? There's some question marks about that. Is he a multi inning middle reliever? That's what he was this year. I think there's a chance that he could stick there. But also, and this is the biggest thing I've talked about throughout the entire season with Beau, is that he needs to develop a slider or a curveball or something that moves horizontally. He has a slider. He threw it, like I said, he threw it pretty much exclusively to righties. But it's just not like the shape of it. It's not the most like prominent pitch you've ever seen. I think it could be. I think with more work, he could develop that, and it could be a really solid pitch for him. But as it stands right now, it's just like it's of his 4 pitches, it is the 4th pitch, and the other 3 all either don't move at all, like it's a 4-seam fastball, or they move vertically. So getting that under his belt is going to be a big step. But if there's a team out there that looks at the Beau Brieske profile and says, I want to give this dude another chance at being a starting pitcher as a buy low candidate, I think the Tigers are very much going to pick up the phone on that. And the thing that I think is most likely, if he does get moved, not saying that moving him is the most likely, but if he does get traded, I think it's incredibly likely that a team has a package put together for someone else on the roster, and they want one more asset, one more type of player to throw into this deal to spice it up a little bit more. I think Beau Brieske is the perfect candidate for that for another club. So I think, again, I don't think it's likely. I don't think it's a 80% chance that this guy gets flipped or anything. But I do think it's a lot. Like, no one's talking about Beau Brieske as a trade candidate. We're all talking about Foley and Lang, and we're talking about the starting pitching, like Matt Manning's of the world. We're talking about all the lefty outfielders we have. I think that Briske's in a weird spot, like fit wise, where it's very like not out of the realm of possibility at all for a team to really want to take a chance on his development and look at his profile and be kind of intrigued as a second piece to another deal. So that's kind of where I stand with him. If he is on the team in 2024, I hope that he is a multi-inning middle reliever, just like he has been in 2023. That's kind of the role that I think he can be his best in, because he gets the uptick in velocity and he can still give you multiple innings. I think just profile-wise, it makes a lot of sense too, even if he never has a really, really good slider or a curveball or anything like that. You can kind of live with that a little bit more out of the bullpen. So I think that that's kind of the role I want to see him in if he's around in 2024. But again, wouldn't be the most shocking thing in the world to me if he was chopped this winter. As far as Jake Rogers goes, at best, you have your starting catcher for the next several seasons. Yeah, that's like best case scenario. If this continues to work and the offense is relatively replicable, relatively repeatable. If he can do that, even close, right, to what he did this year, I think he'll be the catcher for the next several seasons and be the starting catcher at that, and I'm totally fine with it. And at worst, you have your lefty platoon catcher. At worst, you can platoon it that way and just do righty lefty, which is kind of weird for catcher. But if you have 2 good defensive catchers, I'm totally fine with it. You just have to go find that person that is really good against righties and a good defensive catcher. But yeah, that's kind of, I'm realizing that's kind of like not very common, just because catcher is a weird position. But Rogers had an OPS over 800. It was like around 840, I want to say, against lefties this year. He crushed lefties and had an OPS in the 600s against righties. Now, he still had 12 homers off righties and hit 9 off lefties. So, like, he still has the power kind of from both sides, but he'll get on base more, much more against left-handed pitchers. So, at worst, you have a platoon split, a ready lefty platoon split catcher, and at best, you have your starting catcher for the next several seasons. Cool. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. We will be back tomorrow talking about a couple more players, unless any news comes out of Tigers camp. All right. I appreciate y'all. Thanks for rocking with me through this off season. Yeah, appreciate you all greatly. We'll do a mailbag soon, not tomorrow, but I think maybe Monday. We'll figure it out. We'll game plan it. We'll talk about it tomorrow as well. But we're gonna have a mailbag soon as well to answer some questions about the offseason. All right. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. I'll catch y'all then, baby. Go Tigers.